and welcome to another episode of Literary Gladiators, the show where we discuss, debate literature in all of its forms. If it's written work, it's game. Let's meet the panel.
I'm Sara.
Jesi.
I'm Tori.
And I'm Josh. And Sara, welcome back to our panel.
Thank you very much.
Really glad to have you back. You've had...
Glad to be back.
We like you.
And Jesi and Tori, as always, it's a pleasure.
He says
He-
now.
yeah, I was gonna say.
He says now. I promise I'll behave this time around.
I keep inviting you back. So.
One of these days he'll learn.
Eventually.
Alrighty.
Anyway.
We're going to be going over Neil Gaiman's The Ocean at the End of the Lane. This was another Tori selection. And because it was a Tori selection, Tori, you have a discussion starter?
Yeah, I'm actually very excited about this book. I don't even know where to start with it, but I think the thing that I wanted to ask was, what was your thoughts on the portrayal of magic by the Hemstocks? How did you think that? I'm just going to dive right into it. How do you
Brilliantly
think?
woven.
Yes.
It was. I think that this book. I think Neil
You're
Gaiman.
like jumping out of your seat. I'm so
Neil
excited.
Gaiman is just fantastic with being able to weave the supernatural,
Melding, yeah.
with reality.
He blurred it so well together. At first you didn't know which was real and which was like reality, and he just wove it so beautifully together, and it just all worked
one
into
of my-
itself.
The Hemstocks were supernatural, but they're very
Ordinary.
They're a throwback. It's almost they're very old-fashioned with
The
their.
three fates, almost, kind of, in
In
a
a
sense.
way, the farmhouse, their grasp or lack of technology, and the featured family, which because they don't have a name, is more modern per se, but this is Sussex in Britain. But yet they are, while they represent a sense of reality, they are affected by the
I
supernatural.
think one of my favorite lines was right at the beginning where he was sitting at the pond or the ocean, whatever you want to call it, and he's thinking about Letty, and he's like, I forget exactly how it went, but he was just like, the girl who managed to convince me that this pond was an ocean. And I was like, how is it an ocean? It's a pond. and that just kind of like got me into thinking, like how you said, you're not sure what's really happening and what's not really happening. And it was really nicely put together.
It's
just
everybody's
very
grasp of the situation.
surprising.
Yeah,
But that was perfect the way it started off. The story itself, outside of the prologue and the epilogue, is his flashback of everything that's taking place.
Neil Gaiman has this wonderful way of being able to introduce you into the situation and the world in such a natural and organic way that there's no way of being able to be confused or misconstrued, and the only way you're going to be confused is if he does it on purpose. All of his, like this, I can only explain this book as cinematic. Like sitting back and reading it again, because it's been a couple of years, it's been like 4 or 5 years since I picked this up. And mind you, the very first time that I read this, it's a fun little story, I was at New York Comic Con, and I had a head cold, and I was feverish. Never a good idea to be in like a gigantic convention. And it was, thankfully for me, I brought this as my line book, and we had lots of like panels that we were waiting online, so it's a lot of hurry up and wait. Run to the place, make sure you get into the line, so that way and then you sit there for like 20 minutes. So I literally read this entire book that entire day, and I can tell you, I remember getting off the queue path, being led to the convention hall, and then all of a sudden my sister was telling me, I was like flipping to the last page of the book, and my sister was tapping me on the shoulder going, we're back in Hoboken, come on, we gotta get you back and get some liquids in you. So the whole entire thing was just one of those like, I literally lost a whole day to this book. And being able to...
Was this the Neil Gaiman, this was his last book signing that you went to?
No, the most recent book signing I actually got American Gods. It was the graphic novelization of American Gods. Yeah, oh my god, I'm halfway through that book. And I keep on hugging this book. It's just like all of his work I want to hug because he's just so... wonderful.
I have to say, what I think I liked most about this book, and when I first started, I was a little iffy because when he did go into like the flashbacks, he was talking about being 7 years old. I was like, because usually when at least any book that I've ever read, when like the 7-year-old's the main character, they're doing something uncharacteristically brave that a 7-year-old would do. And so and he actually had a 7-year-old act like a 7-year-old. And I was like, this is fantastic, because it's like I can picture this actually happening. And like I actually felt for the little boy when his kitty got hit. Like I wanted to cry.
From the opal miner.
Yeah, and I was
the
like,
opal miner that went took their car and killed himself. When he drove off.
I think that's what makes this book so good, is because the characters are so human. Unless they're not human, in which they are supernatural, bigger than life, and wonderful.
At the beginning of the book, the one thing that got to me, being the avid reader that I am, I love the fact that he wanted books on his birthday cake.
Yeah.
As opposed to spaceships and footballs.
I like that too.
I was looking at candles today at ShopRite, and I was looking for candles that had the different designs. No books.
No books.
There were soccer balls, there were trains.
I think
no books.
That's what is really great about this character, is he takes his cues from books, and he says that throughout the entire book. You know, like
he climbed a tree because boys in books climb trees.
Yes, one of my favorite sections in the book is shortly after his dad tries to drown him, and up until like where the Hemstocks save him, and he talks about how he takes all his cues from the books. Little boys in the books are brave, and they climb trees, and they climb down drain pipes, and they run through fields, and they save the day. And he kind of tries to do that, and I feel like we all kind of do that. We take our cues from the media that we consume. So.
And he even reads his mother's books, and most of them, I would imagine, are very much geared toward female readers, and yet he still immerses himself in them.
Yeah, you felt for him so early on. So for the entire rest of the book, you're just completely just on his side.
Yeah, the one time I was really rooting for him was when they had him locked in his bedroom for the night as punishment, and because he wanted to get away from Ursula, he climbed out the window.
Gosh, she's such
I
a
loved
fun
that move. You have a window right next to you. Are you going to climb out of it, or are you going to endure this for the night? But the first thing I thought about, as absurd as it sounds, was Peter Griffin in the episode of Family Guy when he beat the crap out of that bully.
Yep.
I don't watch it, so I don't know what we're talking about here.
I can't. I love all these Family Guy references.
And then
I've seen literally every episode at least 100,000 times. I can't even. That's not even exaggeration.
But the way that the narrator in this book did it was much more serious. But then again, Ursula, I could not stand her.
Oh my God, she was written so well. She hated so much. I love Neil Gaiman so much.
I kept picturing her as Aurora from Sleeping Beauty, just more humanized cartoon Aurora.
Oh no,
I don't know why, because I was like, her name's Ursula. I feel like I should naturally be picturing Ursula, but no, for some reason they were her blonde hair and how she had this kind of sway about her or something, which kind of gave it away that she was a real woman. And all I thought of was Aurora, how she walked around this, but
just
she was
in
evil
Ocean's
too.
8.
Wait, Ocean's 8, you said?
Yeah, Ocean's 8, not the blonde.
The blonde one.
Yeah, she's exactly who I pictured.
Okay.
Every single time they talked about her, because she's just got that great, she's probably a lovely individual. But that's the face that instantly popped into my head when I read it 5 years ago, and when I read it just recently. But I just back to the Hemstocks. I absolutely love the folk magic. The snip and stitch scene is probably one of my favorite scenes, simply because it's a lot of everyday mundane things that are given such new and weighty significance, and that's how, to me, if you think about magic, if magic is real or not, that kind of stuff is making soup in a specific way. Everybody has a little bit of magic in them. That one person who makes coffee just perfect every single time, finds the perfect parking spot wherever they go. They're always able to find that one pocket in traffic getting on the parkway, all that kind of stuff. I believe in everyday magic, and I feel like this is a wonderful description of that old magic that is in all of us, and they're primitive. They're representation of the old folklore.
And just everything in this book was just so internal. or one of my favorite lines, I don't remember exactly what it was, I can't find it, but the narrator was like, oh, we're too far from the ocean right now. And Letty was just like, I can bring you the ocean. And just how just a child, like, there's not as many boundaries to, like, their imagination as an adult. And as an adult, you know, like,
This is where he transported into the ocean through
the bucket. Where
and I feel like this is that perfect. What we were talking about the last time in Wrinkle in Time of Charles Wallace, who's a 5-year-old who is wise beyond his years, and how they're portrayed. Like you look at Letty and you look at him, and like Letty is. She's been, a kid, but she's been a kid for how many years?
A very long time.
For a very long time. I think he asks her, how long have you been 11 or something at one point in time? And she never answers. So it's that...
And how old is the grandmother, or how old's old Mrs. Hemstock? Yeah. And she said, as old as the moon.
So I think that is this is a brilliant example of how to write somebody who, on the surface, seems very ordinary, and it kind of just gives that feeling of you can never take anybody for granted that you pass on the street.
I think the other thing that was great about this book is even though like it left me with a lot of questions, I was satisfied with not having them answered. Because here you have, this little kid who's 7 years old, and he's just kind of sitting there watching all of these miraculous things happening, and he doesn't even question it. Like,
as a 7-year-old, you kind of
it's just like, oh, okay, you could just cut my pajamas and watching, and he just forgot about it.
But he was able to put his trust into the Hemstocks. When it came to Ursula, he wouldn't even eat anything she cooked.
And I think there's credence in that as well as like a child. Like when you look at adults, you're told kind of like inherently like trust them because they're supposed to be able to lead you in the right direction. And again, harkening back to the conversation we had where he said that the books that he writes for children are not necessarily meant to be horrific. There are not horror stories that he writes for kids. He writes stories of children in perilous situations that are able to overcome them, and this is another great example of that. So
and with Ursula, at first you thought that because he didn't trust her, he was being a brat, but you easily got into the fact that there was quite something wrong with
something wasn't right.
By the by, the description of him like having the hole pulled out of his foot, I'm fairly certain that's an actual worms actually do that. Like guinea worms will if they get into
that's why
that's actually really based off of a real thing. There are squirm alert. There's a worm that's called the guinea worm. I think it's the guinea worm. Gastrointestinal. It gets into your stomach, and then it lays eggs, and then the eggs hatch, and then what they do is they release this numbing agent, and then they burrow their way through your leg and are long and take months to get out of your foot. So that spooling that she was doing with the needle, that's actually what happened.
There's a type of egg that lay spiny eggs, and they lay them in your bladder.
That was the only thing that kind of made me squirm a little bit. I was sitting there, and
that's why they were the number one most extreme animal that people were afraid of.
And I'm just kind of good. He's like, I feel like I should tell my parents about this, but I guess everybody just gets worms in their feet. And I'm like, no, they don't.
When I first read about that, I thought that was a fantastic thing, and then I just recently learned that there is an actual creature that actually does that and actually burrows through you, and you don't feel it until it's sticking out, and then you have the compulsion to go to water, so that way they can start their life cycle over again. That's an actual real thing. So, of course, Neil Gaiman would base something that horrendous on something that nature created. So, I'll just leave that
real life.
Sorry.
Yes.
Now you know.
I wanted to go over the gustatory accomplishments of this piece, and you talk about worms.
And what did you guys learn today?
Again, he's so happy he invited me here.
But let's forget about worms.
Worms aside.
And what worms can do. And let's talk about the gustatory accomplishments to the point. Did anybody have the interview that Neil Gaiman had with Joe Hill? And Joe Hill was so intrigued by the lemon pancake recipe that was featured in this book that he wanted the recipe, and Neil Gaiman gave it to him.
I did not know that. Your food is a big portion of this.
It's in the paperback copy.
Oh, I do have to say, I have, I since I work an hour away, I often listen to books on my way to and from work. he actually on Audible narrates this work. And so after I got about halfway through the book, I was like, I'm going to listen to this.
How did you not fall asleep? Yeah, I was just going to say, that was not the voice
I actually really enjoyed it. I felt like it made the whole book even better because of how he narrated it. It was just fantastic.
He creates these everyman. Yeah,
he has this just the accent and how it works.
Wonderful English accent. Yeah, it's just great. It's great.
But one of my I put down the it is great. I
think my favorite honestly was because he kind of changed his voice a little bit to for old Mrs. Hemstock. That was fantastic. I was just the shriek of an old British woman's voice. It was so great.
And what does Ursula sound like?
Just very drone kind of. Yeah. I have it. You guys can totally listen to it.
As a drone, she would that would make her so predictable.
Yeah, it was just very now, child, go to your room, and you're just okay. Whereas
it's like Snape in Drag.
Yeah. Whereas old Mrs. Hemstock was oh, pish posh, stuffy nonsense, and you're just I love her. It was great.
But
it definitely made the book.
I would say one of my favorite lines at the beginning of the book had to do with the gustatory and his the narrator and what he thinks bread is. The fact that because his father brings in the thick loaves of brown bread, he thinks that proper bread was white and pre-sliced and tasted like almost nothing. That was the point. And I can't, and then go back to Family Guy, and I can't stop thinking about Brian having an argument with Lois about not feeding his son white bread.
I know exactly what you're, because I kind of thought the same thing where he's like, I don't want you to feed my kid white bread. It's just, let's not fight in front of the children, just don't give them white bread. And you're just it's bread.
Food is, I feel a very big portion of the
turning point of my reception of white bread, and I barely ever. Granted, I'll eat it on a roll, but not pre-sliced. But
we have to clarify.
But I love the description of the tomato and cheese sandwich too. At the very end, the freshly baked bread, the sharp, salty cheese, the kind of tomatoes that actually taste like something. But.
Again, harkening back to the simple homemade magic. Food is such a big portion, and it's a universal. So food is a comfort.
And
item.
It's reality, but it's so. In some cases, it's so good that
have you ever had something that's so transcendent? Yeah, it can seem like
home.
Yeah, there are certain things that I can think of that, when I think of comfort, I think of soup, or if I think of something that's very warm, there's no wonder he constantly is eating at the Hemstocks, is because that's a good form of comfort and nourishment, and it's a sign of love is when you spend time to make food, and when you make good food, both nutritionally and taste wise, that's it's a sign of care put into that. So it's a very nice detail.
Can I kind of ask a question that's not on the topic of food? Actually, I kind of want to.
Yeah, sure.
Because I felt at the end of the book, obviously with everything that happened with Letty. Kind of, even, she's not dead, but she might as well be because she's so hurt, and she was given back to the ocean, and, he comes back after the funeral, and he's there so many times, but he never remembers being there, and it kind of came across to me that Mrs. Hemstock, in a way, blamed him for what happened to Letty, and I was just curious to think, do you think that's why he loses his memories? When he goes to leave their house, how he just, all of a sudden he doesn't know who they are, doesn't remember going there.
You mean she forces him? Well, not forces.
He keeps going back,
he ends up ultimately keep going back, but every time it's time for him to leave, he forgets everything. And
I think it goes back to, at one point they were talking about, there were men on the farm at one point or another, but they always get that certain urge, and once that urge comes, it's
they're not to them.
So that's kind of what I hearkened it to.
To them, all men are good for is breeding other men.
Yeah, basically.
And because to me that makes sense, but almost at the same time, he isn't a Hemstock, so And it wasn't like he was there for breeding or anything. He just like ultimately, like subconsciously, and this is how I understood it. He subconsciously kept going back there because that's where he felt safe and comfortable.
Yeah.
But then was it basically met by Mrs. Hemstock, like even though she was being nice to him, I felt like there was an undertone of, "You're the reason Letty's not here. Go away."
Letty was a very selfless
Yes,
character,
and I
she
really liked
chose
her.
to put herself. She chose to give herself up in order to.
Yeah, but I feel like that doesn't make it any easier for,
doesn't,
I guess,
but
for mother to
Absolutely.
accept.
What was it that? It doesn't make it easier for the mother, but it wasn't as if he put her in the he was placed in the situation because the demons were after him, but he didn't make her help him.
She
out of the
chose it,
situation.
and
Yeah,
because
she chose
it was
to
a decision.
smother him.
Yeah, it was a decision
Yeah.
about him. I think there's some sense of like blame.
Yeah, that's why I was just trying to, like, did anybody else kind of get that sort of
Definitely
vibe a little bit from her? Or
I
was
think
it just kind of
she
me?
did a good job concealing it. I'll say
Yeah,
that.
like it was a concealed vibe, but it was definitely there.
I think she wanted him to know that he was responsible for it.
Yeah,
I don't
you know.
think it was more as much pushing blame. I think
Mhm.
she kind of kept that like on the down low a bit.
Yeah,
It was the only human part of her, I think, that,
Yeah.
you know, when you look at it, they're kind of almost inhuman. They're these transcendent, supernatural entities that kind of represent this sort of idyllic life and idyllic way of living, and using the forces around them that seem very, like, I keep on saying this word mundane, but it's the only word that I can think of, in a very extraordinary fashion. And so she kind of did something extraordinary that was out of the ordinary. It was supposed to be this progression of all of them phasing from one age to the next, and she was supposed to just follow along in that lineage of the Hemstocks, and she kind of didn't do that. She did something that was very different, and it was because of him, because of his intrusion, and not an intrusion like he wasn't intruding, but because of his outside force, he was that potential that caused her to, you know, sacrifice herself. So I can see how, from a maternal standpoint or from a protective standpoint, she puts some of the responsibility and the onus, even if he doesn't even remember it. And I think that's what makes it even harder on him, is he may not necessarily remember these things moving forward.
And actually,
And
that's
she kind
what
of
do you
almost
think
that's
about-
why I
for
thought
that.
he didn't remember it, was because, like, every time it seemed like every time he left their farm, like, he just suddenly didn't remember them. And you know, and I kind of took it as she in a way, I guess, kind of wanted to keep him away just because she doesn't want to be reminded of, my daughter, you know, sacrificed herself for you.
I saw it conversely.
And so-
He's not part of the family. He's not part of that, so he can't hold on to it. So she
Oh, okay.
resents him for not being able to. To be able, so she's the only one who lives with this moment, lives with that guilt, not guilt, but this sensation of, you know, I know about this and you forgot about it.
Yeah.
You went on in your life and you moved on and you
I would
had
say,
I
it.
was just gonna say, he was
Okay.
going to move on with his
Tori.
life. He had to go out and do
Gotcha.
it.
I
And
think
it
he had-
reminds him, like, when he comes
But-
back to visit.
I took
and,
it totally
and the guilt
opposite.
is what forces him to come back
Yeah.
every
What
single time.
do you guys think about Ocean the cat? Do you think that there's a piece of Letty in Ocean? Because
I
Ocean
think so.
came after Letty gave herself up for him, and Ocean, he never died. He just went away, and a cat that was very much like him, or her, came back.
Yeah,
at the
I
end of the book.
definitely took it as
They
Letty's
talk about
own.
at one point hiding
there's-
him, and old Mrs. Hemstock says, "Oh, you know, like, what should we do with him to keep him safe?" Back to the snip and stitch scene where she's like, "Oh, we can turn him into something," and Letty's like, "We are not turning him into something." So, like, that's a possibility. So yeah, I can definitely see that as
I could,
she
because
just took a
there's a
different
piece
form
of
because
her-
she's so elemental.
There's a
Yeah.
piece of her there. There's a piece of her in the ocean, and then there's even a piece of her, the two moons, as he's driving away, which to me really resemble eyes.
And I thought for him too, like, Letty dying and, like, being brought back into the ocean, I think that's kind of just internally, like, as a child you have to accept death sometimes, and that's how he was accepting it, like, how if someone dies, like, they just go back into, like,
They're
I don't know,
part
the
of the
earth's, like,
world,
force,
yeah.
and, like, and, like, they'll
They
be
were
brought into
forces of nature,
and, like, a piece of them will be brought into someone else's life, whether that's in the version of a person, animal, or just anything.
You will always
like that.
find some semblance of that other person.
Mhm.
They will always be with you because you will always be able to find some reference of
Yeah.
themselves. And be it that it's an actual part of Letty or it's a part of him that he likens to her, she will live on
Yeah.
in that form.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm. Instead of the acceptance that she went to Australia.
I mean that too.
Mhm. That was a bit of a coping mechanism.
Yeah.
Because that was the thing that got me too, and why I thought it was possibly the hemstocks, kind of messing with his brain a little bit. Because when he got to the door, he remembered a party that didn't happen, and he was like, "I know this didn't happen, but I remember it so well."
Well,
And
also
Going
kind
away
of
party.
that's
Yeah.
the fun little like wink and nod at the camera that Neil Gaiman does so masterfully of. You were reliving all of this story through a 7-year-old's eyes. So a lot of this could be just the play pretend of his, or it could actually have been this terrible, horrible situation that happened. Because like I can think of some situations that like as a kid, like I lived in the Pine Barrens for a very long time when I was a kid, and having those like ridiculous adventures of unseen forces and saving the day as a kid with like my friends. So those stories stay with you, and their stories. But looking back in that situation, being in that locale, sometimes it almost can feel visceral. So, and that's the fun way that Neil Gaiman kind of plays with this, of giving you this feeling of, these stories are really what happened to these kids. Or is it? And that wink of the unreliable narrator, and the unreliable narrator being unreliable to himself.
Right.
Is that question of age and death and transistence. So.
I think it's interesting the way I don't know if I'd consider this narrator. I don't know how unreliable I'd consider this narrator. I guess it depends on.
He's reliable in so much as he's telling what he knows and with his point of view, but because you have that first person limited aspect, he's unreliable, kind of like Harry Potter
did
is.
he actually
in his
see a
world.
shadow,
No
or
one
was
can
there a
prove
shadow
it.
there, or
But-
was it not? And he
But
just
the
thought he
reason-
saw it, so.
But it's also interesting. The whole family is not. None of them have names, and I think that gives you a much more
Mythical.
space for you to place your shoes in there.
Right.
Oh, absolutely.
place.
It become the vacant spot for you to be able to
Because
slip in.
I felt because to me, when you withhold a name from your central character, your central first-person character, when it's done well, it gives you that great ability to place yourself in their shoes much
It's
better.
like the video game equivalent of the silent protagonist in
Yeah.
first
If
person.
not-
That's you.
The more you leave out, the more the person has to fill in.
Yeah,
for them.
if it's
And you
done
put yourself in
poorly,
there, yeah.
to me, it's just lazy writing.
But it's not done for
But this is, not in this case. That's what I wrote in my review.
I really enjoyed this. I didn't
But-
think
This
I
is
enjoyed
a
it as much
marvelous
as I did.
read. And there were parts of this book that, like, reading it now, like I said, like, I totally forgot. And I was like, oh, snap! So it was like reading a whole new book all over again. So that was fun.
I think it's always, even when I read something, I think I find it helpful to reread it
Oh, absolutely.
when we're preparing for discussion. And before I ask for final thoughts, I can officially say I'm on the Neil Gaiman bandwagon.
Yeah.
I was gonna say, I
You
will
should
definitely be
look up
picking up
Amanda
something
Palmer too. That's his wife, and she's a performer and musician.
Yeah, she's
pretty
fun.
rad.
I've heard a lot about her too.
She's a interesting.
She is interesting.
Do we have any final thoughts?
Read it.
Yeah.
Please do yourself a favor. Just read it.
And
Yeah, it
how would
was really good.
how do we want to rate it? 0 to 5, half stars permitted?
4.
Yeah, it's like a 4, 4.5. I really, really enjoyed it.
5.
Five,
5.
I'm-
Crazy
6,
people.
7, 8.
I'm
Crazy
giving
people.
I'm giving this a 5 as well
Oh.
because I think this really
Well,
spoke to me. I felt the great sense of an epiphany reading this because it just made me feel very refreshed because he did such a good job placing you in his shoes, and I think I could relate. But granted, I am a male. I like to read. I'm an introvert,
Kind of harmonized with
I-
your likes.
yes.
Very well.
and I think that
No, it was a very imaginative and,
Right.
like we said before,
And
very
done
well woven together story.
masterfully and worded in such a way
And-
that you can visualize it so easily. Sorry,
Yeah,
that's all I was gonna
that's
say.
no, and he really did a very nice job. And like I said, if you guys do get the chance, just like get his narrated version of it on like Audible or something, because he really and that helps bring it to life even more than just reading it too. Like, I don't know, overall I really did enjoy the book. I actually recommended it to my brother, who I believe was supposed to read the book, and he didn't get the chance to. And
This
now
wasn't my
that I read, I was
sister's
like, read
copy,
it
and
anyway.
chuck it out.
But
Read it.
he, I think Neil Gaiman also does a great job melding genres together.
Absolutely.
This is horror, fantasy, supernatural, paranormal. I would even say literary fiction.
Neil Gaiman does a wonderful job being able to sit his, high fantasy fiction right alongside his everyday pedestrian, and it's done in such a way that it feels organic and natural, and like you're being told this story by somebody you're sitting next to. You're overhearing this story, and it's in a way that it's just like, okay.
Yes, indeed.
It's believable, and I love it.
Yep.
Go read it,
Mm-hmm.
please.
You made a good pick, Tori.
Yay!
Yay! Yeah, you'll be definitely hearing more from me, more about this. So.
And if you're interested in picking it up, here is a copy of The Ocean at the End of the Lane. I have it in
An
paperback.
invisible copy.
Sarah and Tori have it in...
I have to.
they have it in hardcover.
Without the copy.
Mine has an interview with Joe Hill in it. And I hope you guys join us again for another episode of Literary Gladiators. For now, keep reading.
Bye.